Welcome to Decrypt, Asia's first blockchain and cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Tushar. Each week, we take a deep dive into the Asian blockchain scene with investors, technologists, and industry insiders. Go to decrypt.asia to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram to join in the discussions. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Hi, Tushar. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into what you're up to these days, could you give us a quick introduction about yourself, how you came to be involved in the blockchain and cryptocurrency ecosystem?
Yeah, right. So basically, I would like to claim credit that I kind of spotted the whole trend, but I really can't because I didn't have anything to do with that. My brother, he's a millennial, and he way back in about 2011, he actually told me about Bitcoin and that sort of thing, and he was mining it off his GPU at the time. He had a whole gaming rig set up, and he was saying that you should take a look at this thing. It's gonna be big really soon. And I obviously, just like everybody else, what is this thing? Digital code? How's this money? Yeah, it's a scam, naturally. And but from there, I said he kept badgering me. He said you should really take a look at it. Just read it. Don't just dismiss it offhand. So I spent some time. I invested time to go and read up about it, and then when I went down that rabbit hole, I just never really came out. Once I understood the rationale behind it, once I understood the elegance of the math, I just kind of fell in love. And for me, when I first started, obviously, and even to today, it was never really about the money or the dollar value of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. It was just I fell in love with the technology. And from there, it's just been sort of meeting people, going for meetups, and over the years, besides just having a little bit of my own part of crypto. Obviously, I sold some in the early days, much to my regret. But it was just really being involved in the space, getting to know the people, and obviously my background as a lawyer during the ICO craze of 2017 that helped as well. And then now I've moved on to actually become a general partner in a cryptocurrency quantitative trading firm. We've sort of run our own fund, and what we do is we do quant trading strategies, which basically profit off the inefficiencies inherent in the cryptocurrency markets.
All right. I think that's a very good overview of what you do. And given your background as a lawyer, I think since you're a partner at a fund now, I think there's a couple of interesting things that we can talk about during this discussion. So let's start off with the fun stuff. Regulations.
Yes, regulations.
So in general, what do you make of the regulatory environment? We've got the SEC, which has certain views. China has certain views, both of which are kind of the big dogs. And then there's places like Malta, Gibraltar with their own views. What do you make of all of this from a macro context?
Well, obviously, when you're gonna have different regulatory frameworks in different jurisdictions, and you know how globalized and how interconnected the world is, especially when it comes to things like cryptocurrencies and blockchain, which don't require intermediary banks and don't require centralized institutions. Like, for instance, you don't need a New York banking relationship to pass through the value of Bitcoin, for instance. You don't have to use the regular channels. You're going to have what has already been happening for centuries, actually. This whole thing about regulatory arbitrage, where companies now, which are, and especially blockchain and cryptocurrency companies, they're not tied down to necessarily any physical location. Sure, if you have a mining facility and stuff like that, you may be physically tied down, but the reality is that that's easily replicable in another jurisdiction. But more importantly, the big movers in the space, I would say, are sort of the protocol developers and those people who are the traders, the fund managers and stuff like that. And they can move. They're very mobile. They don't have to have their operations in any one jurisdiction. So when you see countries like Gibraltar and Malta, what they're probably doing is they're trying to, these are tiny countries. Not that Singapore is massive or anything, but even in relation to a tiny little country like Singapore, these countries are really, really small. They've got populations in the hundreds of thousands, and they are obviously trying to carve a niche for themselves in the cryptocurrency space by providing sort of a conducive regulatory environment for cryptocurrency and or blockchain companies to come and develop their technology there. And I think it's a good idea. And I think that if you look at it the way sort of small nations like the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, even Vanuatu for that matter, or Labuan, how they've sort of they've taken the sort of disadvantages that they have, a small country with a lack of natural resources and stuff like that, and they've harnessed regulatory arbitrage for their advantage. So what we're going to do is we're going to see that this will continue to happen unless and until there is perhaps a greater like an international standardization and harmonization of regulations with regards to cryptocurrencies and blockchain. But I don't think that's going to come anytime soon. I could be wrong, but I doubt it, because if we've looked in the financial services industry, for instance, we have regulatory arbitrage even to this day. There is a reason why companies choose to register themselves in Delaware or Jersey or Guernsey or any one of the other jurisdictions where they are sort of more tax sensitive, as you might say. So, and that's what we're looking. And I think, at least from Singapore's perspective, when it comes to cryptocurrency, I have to say that the regulator, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, has actually taken on a very enlightened approach, where you want to make sure that you protect the most vulnerable and the weakest in your society from being taken in by scams and Ponzi schemes. And at the same time, you want to provide enough leeway and a secure framework for companies who want to take that step towards innovation, towards fintech innovation, and to provide a very vibrant environment. And I think we managed to balance that really well. And I think that it makes me proud to see that Singapore has actually stepped up and taken the lead. And despite being relatively small compared to some of the other players, we are actually the world's third largest jurisdiction for ICOs in 2017, and we continue to grow. And I think we've actually overtaken to come up in either number 1 or number 2 this year, which to me is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I concur and echo your thoughts about the approach that the MAS has taken. And obviously, having worked with the MAS quite closely as part of my day job, I generally think that, I think the approach that they're taking is the right way to go ahead. What do you make of ETFs and SEC's stance on ETFs? Do you think this is all just politics, or there's actually substance and rationale behind why ETFs are being rejected?
Well, it could be a combination of reasons. Let's not forget that, to get anything done in Washington, you need a pretty powerful lobby. And right now, the cryptocurrency industry is simply not organized enough, and nor is it well funded enough to sort of match up with the banking services lobby, which is extremely powerful lobby up on Capitol Hill. And I know for a fact that banks and other institutional financial institutions are looking at this space. Now, the regulations are not clear, and as you know, these sort of regulations take time, and the lobbies are powerful. So it's not in their interest for the banking lobby as well, or the financial services lobby, to have things like a Bitcoin ETF or a crypto ETF or an Ethereum ETF when they're not ready to play. So I actually think that there is a political element to why ETFs are being rejected. And I don't think that as a community as a whole, the crypto community or the blockchain community should be too obsessed by this. Everybody is sort of, especially, we are agnostic to market movements. So whether or not the price of USD rises or falls against a cryptocurrency, because we are a startup fund, we are kind of agnostic to that. But for the long funds or people who have gone long in USD terms on crypto, there's going to be quite a bit of despair, especially because the last 3 quarters of a year has been rough in terms of the USD valuations of cryptocurrencies. So everybody's sort of like hoping that, okay, you know what, ETF is going to be the next silver bullet. ETF is going to be sort of our white knight and to save us. And once we have an ETF, the values are going to go up again, and we're going to get another bull run like we saw in 2017. And I think as a community, we should move beyond that. We should be mature enough to see that, you know what, that's not what we need, guys. What we need is better technology. We need to build out the infrastructure. We need to improve adoption. We need to improve access and really clean up our reputation as an industry as a whole. If we keep being associated with scams, if we keep being associated with volatility, there is no value to that, and we'll really be undermining ourselves. So that there is that. Yeah.
So I think if I'm not wrong, you've helped out a couple of companies with their ICOs in the capacity of a lawyer. So how does a lawyer
Yes.
approach a client who's doing an ICO?
Well, back in those days, it was relatively straightforward. I mean, yeah, I know I say back in those days like it was years ago, but it wasn't actually that long ago. But at
Yeah.
least back then, it was relatively straightforward. Basically, what clients wanted was to make sure that they weren't overstepping themselves and issuing what was the equivalent of a share. So we would issue our opinions with regards to just confirm that there was a utility in their token, that the token was not a utility token, and then we would take care of their private sale agreements and stuff like that, their pre-ICOs, and we would just take them through the entire process. Now, because regulation hasn't changed all that much, that entire process which I've just described hasn't really changed all that much. However, what I have observed, and as I'm sure you are well aware as well, is that there has been a move more towards completing your funding during the pre-ICO stage, so that there's never ever a public ICO. So, and I that's a trend that I've been noticing as well. So, and as a result, sort of the legal burdens that would otherwise ensue if you were doing a public ICO are no longer as pressing, especially if you're doing a sort of a private ICO placement. It's almost like, I'm buying a set of tools from you, a hammer, a nail, a chainsaw, whatever. It's just a private entreaty. So that's what I'm seeing.
Okay. And so the new hustle in town is STOs, or security token offerings.
Yes.
And that seems to be sort of the buzzword in the last sort of couple of weeks or last month or so. I think it's really picked up. What do you make of STOs? And do you think, I guess the involvement of lawyers would only increase with STOs sort of coming more into the picture. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, to me, I liked, I get it. ICOs, there were a lot of scams in 2017. That's just the reality. There were, but for as many scams as there were also many, many good companies who were genuinely trying to build out a product, who were genuinely trying to build out a utility token. Now, when it comes to STOs, I feel that and again, it's linked to the point about ETFs. We're sort of like, we're chasing our own tails, the whole purpose, let's just go back to why the blockchain exists. Why does Bitcoin exist? It was because we wanted to shed all of the different structures that were in place in the financial services industry, which made it sort of like an insiders club. So either, if you want to take part in a pre-IPO, you had to know someone. So it was a very secular, it was a closed off way for the rich essentially to get richer. And the ethos of the blockchain and Bitcoin was that, no, you know what, everybody should have an opportunity. And that was what ICOs were in a sense. Of course, as with anything that where you meet irrational exuberance, as Alan Greenspan once said, you're going to get to that stage where valuations just completely go out of whack in terms of what their relative value is or was. So when we go to STOs, I think in many ways, we're sort of, yes, I can see the argument for STOs in terms of efficiency, but are we really going a step forward? Are we going a step in the right direction? Because it feels to me as if with security tokens, again, we're looking for our next silver bullet, something to raise valuations, because ETFs are not working. Okay, and ETFs, what is that a function of? ETF is actually from the traditional capital markets. It didn't exist when Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever they were, or him or her was, it didn't exist. They didn't envisage such a situation where they would be issuing out ETFs. And now we're looking at security tokens. And what is a security token? It's a form of a share, a form of equity. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily taking ourselves forward. I can see the argument for that, and I think it's a valid argument. But in terms of whether or not this is the right way to go, let's not forget, are we undermining the existing capital market structure? Are we necessarily adding value, or are we just distracting? And I think that's something that we need to be introspective about. We have to ask ourselves, are we adding value by issuing out a security token? Is that something? Is there another way? Because then there are other options as well. There's second market, there's OTC markets, which have existed in NASDAQ for decades, well before the need for a security token. Is it a solution in search of a problem, is what I would ask. And I'm not necessarily convinced.
Okay, I think those are very interesting views. I mean, my personal opinion is that I think the good thing about one positive thing that I see about STOs or just tokenization of assets in general is the amount of liquidity that it generates and how much liquidity is freed up. And I think that's sort of the value in my opinion. But I hear your thoughts in terms of, whether do we really need STOs and whether we're just undermining the current capital market structure. So those are very interesting thoughts. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your
Sure.
other venture, which is keeping you busy these days. You're the general counsel and a general partner for a crypto hedge fund or a quantitative
Yep.
trading fund, which is a highly unenviable position to be in. I wouldn't want to be the general counsel for a crypto fund. For the benefit of our listeners, could you talk a little bit more about the fund and what your role entails as general counsel?
Okay, so Compton Hughes is basically a quantitative cryptocurrency firm. And what we do is, unlike traditional funds where they accept fiat currency, we only accept cryptocurrency. So the story behind the fund was we were actually basically trading for ourselves because we run a payment gateway, which links merchants, fiat on-ramps for merchants, and for people who have large pools of cryptocurrency and who want to sort of buy items, luxury items. They typically are like works of art, luxury cars, property, yachts, and that sort of thing. And they needed a way to do that. And as a payment gateway, we needed to find a way to hedge sort of the volatility inherent inside cryptocurrencies, so that we would still make the fee from the transfer, but at the same time that we wouldn't be exposing ourselves unnecessarily to unnecessary risk during the process. And so we developed these automated algorithms to trade, to protect ourselves. And it was during this process that we actually discovered that they were actually income generating. So we tweaked it to the to the sell side. So we were on the buy side initially, and now we tweaked it to the sell side, and we realized that actually there was a position for set up for algorithmic trading, and there were opportunities there to sort of to adopt a market agnostic approach towards trading cryptocurrencies. And we have been successsul, and the fund has returned, I believe as of today, it's up about 51% over the last, and it's been in operation for about 5-6 months now. We had projected sort of a more conservative return, but we suspect that part of the reason that we've reached our annual target so quickly is because also that the cryptocurrency markets don't sleep, and as a result we probably got there 3 times as fast, and as well as that our algos trade about 100,000 times a day on certain days. So that's what the fund is. Now, as the general counsel, what I do is I make sure that we are legal. Of course, I also look towards, and right now the fund is expanding. So we've been desperately searching for a fund administrator for a long time, and we've managed to find some good partners. It's not that easy. That I'll explain to you why, because there are a few barriers. First of all, not all fund administrators will want to deal in crypto. I understand that, and then those that do want to deal in crypto may not necessarily want to deal with a fund that trades the volume of trades that we do. Because if we're talking about 100,000 trades a day on average, sometimes you can go up to 1 million easy a month, and not all fund administrators can handle that. But fortunately, we have good partners, and they are able to handle that. So what I do is I keep abreast of all the latest regulations, be it in Singapore, as well as in New York, as well as in London, and all the major financial capitals in the world. Just so that we are constantly above board, we're constantly protecting the interests of our clients. We ensure that our clients, especially from a tax perspective, because some clients will be from certain more tax-sensitive jurisdictions, and we ensure that they're all taken care of from a legal perspective. So that's basically on a day-to-day basis. And I also sit on the risk management panel within the firm as well. So I ensure that the risk managers consider the legal risks as well, because while they manage trading risks, I also oversee legal risks of the fund as a whole. So that's what I do basically on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And what are the kinds of, so let's talk about the fund a little bit. What are the kinds of strategies that the algos are deploying? Like high level, are you able to speak about it?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I can speak about it at a high level. So basically, what we do is we do statistical arbitrage. That's one of our core strategies. And statistical arbitrage is just basically looking at convergence and divergence when we have overlaid certain patterns in certain models, and when we look and when there's a divergence in prices, that's when we start to accumulate positions, be it on the sell side or buy side. And then once those positions start to converge, we exit out of those positions, and we make very very small trades. They can be as small as half an ether to 1/10 of an ether, and we generally trade many times. Now, there's the market making strategy as well. And again, these are not strategies which are new. These are strategies which already exist in the capital markets. The reason why it's lucrative to do it in the crypto markets is because in terms of trading fees, there is no minimum transaction size. So we can do really, really small trades. And if you keep your bands really, really tight, say instead of like 3%, you just put it down to like say 1%, for instance, you can just make off the spreads and it's sufficient. It's almost like what Warren Buffett likes to call cigarette butt investing, where you just, when somebody stubs out a cigarette butt, sometimes it's just one last toke in the cigarette. And when you do that 100,000 times a day, you don't just end up with a pack of cigarettes, you end up with a whole warehouse full of cigarettes. So, and that's sort of the strategies that we take. So what we're looking for is little inefficiencies, and we're sort of like just picking pennies off the floor, and eventually those pennies add up. And especially when it's automated, you don't really have to. The strategy initiates the trade, but once we've initiated the trade, the robots take over.
And so I know some other funds which are trying to do or doing something similar along the lines of what you guys are doing. Are there any particular strategies or particular things that you're doing that set you guys apart, that make you guys unique?
Well, I don't know for a fact what their exact strategies are. I know what makes our strategy unique. I'm not sure if you can even call it unique, but we were one of the first few to do it. And because it was never intended for that purpose, it takes into account certain considerations which a fund which was specifically designed just purely for trading arbitrage may not have taken into account. So that has helped us as well. We have a good team. We've built really good algos. We've built really good bots to trade as well, and we've been plugging into these APIs for a long time. And it also helps that we've had a long relationship with all the exchanges that we trade on. So in terms of what the greatest benefit, I would say probably of our strategy is that we are extremely conservative. So we, as opposed to other funds which may or may not emphasize how much you could gain, what we always stress is what is the risk that we take. And so we take a very stern and very strict and disciplined view towards risk management. So even small things like we don't hold more than say 10% of any particular trading pair, so that any loss in any one pair will not affect the overall portfolio. We try to limit portfolio risks to no greater than 10%, and then there are certain measures to stop loss in situations like that, and where we would rather take a smaller loss as opposed to taking a bigger risk and then for a smaller gain. So our risk management, I would say, is probably one of our core strengths in this space. And again, we adopt a relatively institutional approach towards the whole trading strategy. So that's probably something that, because the cryptocurrency markets are so new, I think it's something that will take time to get up to speed. But we expect that it will come.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your role as General Counsel as well. Since you mentioned that you take subscriptions in crypto, how do you go about ensuring protecting investor interests?
Okay.
What does the process look like? I mean, like, is it sort of akin to how you would subscribe into a fund in the traditional markets, or like, is there any difference? Okay.
It's very much like how you would subscribe into a fund as well. And even though strictly speaking, it's not absolutely necessary to do so, we do it. We do the typical KYC and AML as per any other fund structure as well. And so what we will do is we'll do a chain analysis of the source of the crypto to ensure that it's not tainted funds, that they were not stolen, that they were not associated with any particular hack, for instance. And generally, of course, we do due diligence on the client themselves. And then once they do that, then the contracts and everything, it's pretty much standard as per any other fund you would expect. So that's the only real difference, is that instead of when you do KYC and AML as to the source of funds that a normal fund would do, they do it through a bank. What we do is we just check it on the blockchain, which we've been doing for a while.
Right. And so I understand that you do KYC AML, but you're sort of a money manager as well. So how do you ensure that your fund doesn't run into trouble with the regulators? Have you had any sort of interaction with the regulators regarding setting up this fund? Or like, what is, like, what's your thought process, and what was the kind of like, how did you set up this fund?
Well, we set it up as a company in Singapore, and that's how we started it off. And now what we're looking to do is we're looking to offshore the company and the fund to a Cayman structure, as it has been advised by a fund administrator, either to Cayman, Bermuda, or another offshore fund structure. It's interesting you should mention that. There are opportunities as well to do it in Singapore. I believe that the Business Times just covered that today, where they are allowing variable capital companies, which are very, very similar to some of the fund structures that we've become very familiar with in places like the Cayman Islands, Dublin, and Luxembourg. And what that does is it actually helps in the distribution and reduction of capital. It also helps to ensure that things like financial statements and register of members will not be publicly retrievable, which is sometimes quite important to fund clients just for privacy reasons. So and that's what we've done. In terms of the regulator, we have queried, and from our understanding, because of the status of cryptocurrencies are ambiguous, as long as we make declarations with regards to tax and that kind of thing, the regulator has been extremely supportive. And I have to say once again that from that perspective, the MAS it's a very enlightened institution led by very enlightened people.
Okay, you mentioned tax, and this was something I didn't have on my list to ask you, but since you mentioned it,
sure.
How are you approaching the issue of tax? What tax purview? I'm presuming you would come under the Singapore tax purview, but what has been the interaction with the tax authorities, or how do you approach taxation for a fund like yours?
Well, okay. So it's interesting that you should mention that we have actually decided to work closely with the tax authorities, and basically we declare because as what we do is just like how in a traditional hedge fund structure, we take a performance fee and a management fee, but unlike in a traditional fund structure, those fees are claimed in crypto and not fiat. So what we do is we make a declaration to the tax authorities that we've got such and such. This is the approximate valuation, and then from there we work with the tax authorities to see, because I don't at least from a Singapore perspective, at least there aren't capital gains taxes and stuff like that. So the sort of tax status of the income that the fund receives is not entirely clear at this point in time, but I believe that there will be greater clarity in the coming days. In terms of our clients, each of them, especially if they come from certain jurisdictions, then they need to get advice in terms of tax from their own tax advisors, and we usually link them up to some of our existing service providers, and they advise them as to how to deal with the tax. But it's a good question. Honestly, right now we are erring on the side of caution. So when it comes to tax, we prefer to be upfront, declare ahead of time, and then take instruction from there.
Okay. Yeah, I was following. We're connected on multiple social media platforms. I saw that you recently wrote an article exploring security tokens and stablecoins and kind of comparing the two, and just exploring where the whole ecosystem is headed in the context of these two topics. Could you give a quick summary of the point that you were trying to drive in your post?
Yeah, so basically what I was trying to say is that I didn't want, well, it's not so much what I wanted, but I was of the view that I think this whole fixation with security tokens, it's not helping. It's not the silver bullet that I think that we're going to find out that it's not the silver bullet that we're looking for. And that's not to say that stablecoins are. It's just that look at it from a merchant's perspective. How are we going to get greater crypto adoption? if we're going to get greater crypto adoption, we need to ensure stability. We need to ensure that, that the guy on the corner mom and pop store who's selling you a bar of chocolate, he needs to know that the Ethereum, the point something of an Ethereum that you're paying him is going to be worth that amount in terms of goods and services that he can buy tomorrow. It can't be that today he buys, you pay 1 Ethereum and tomorrow the value of Ethereum versus the US dollar just shoots through the roof. In which case it provides a disincentive for people to spend the cryptocurrency. So to me, adoption is the key. And that's my opinion. And that was the thrust and parry of my piece, which was that adoption is what is going to push this industry beyond that tipping point, and where it can't just be a bunch of like yourself and myself. It just can't be always us moving around the same space and going to the same seminars, constantly going to the same conferences, because and I'm sure you know this, because we go to so many of the same sort of events and we end up seeing always the same people. It needs to move beyond that, and in order to move beyond that, I'm not convinced that security tokens are the way to go, because again, to me, that's just like ICO part 2. It's just another sort of step in that direction where you allow more speculators to come in, as opposed to a stable coin, which actually could help to promote adoption. Look, if I'm having a stable coin, I'm saying it's backed by a certain asset, then that would provide sort of the surety and sort of the confidence for merchants or for users or for retailers, sort of like to just dip their toe into the pool. I'm not saying jump straight in. Try a stable coin. You know what? There's no harm. It's worth 1:1, and that's how you want to get them into the ecosystem. And I think in terms of adoption and greater growth, that's how we could do it, and that's how we should do it, and that's the what we should be pursuing. And it should come as no surprise that Circle, which is backed by Goldman Sachs, is looking at stable coins, because I'm sure they identified that is the way forward to sort of bring this to the global consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, and I really like that viewpoint. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that we may not have covered during the interview?
Well, it's interesting that the last point we spoke about was stable coins, and I just actually wrote a piece about the hidden dangers of stable coins. It's on my Medium page. You can look it up.
Yeah, I'll link it up as well in the show notes.
Yeah, great, thanks. And what I talked about is that, again, we have to look at things in what is the end goal. In law school, what we've always taught is that when we do something, or we argue something, we need to always fall back on first principles. What is it that we're trying to achieve here? Now, if it's the goal to just create more speculation and to constantly churn up volatility in prices, as profitable as that may be for funds like mine, that shouldn't be the ultimate goal of the space. The ultimate goal of the space is to provide a viable alternative for the unbanked, to provide a seamless sort of transfer of value for people across the globe without as much slippage as we currently experience. No more sort of high transaction fees from all the financial intermediaries, and sort of to decentralize and redistribute sort of the gears of wealth. And if there's no point in having sort of the top, like 90% of the value of say any particular crypto, like say for instance Bitcoin, for instance, in the top 10 addresses, that doesn't do anything and doesn't add value to the world we live in. If we wanted to do that, well, let's just stick to the traditional financial markets. They've done that very well. If the next millennium, the next century is going to be one where we return power and we sort of redistribute and the resources of this world in a more equitable fashion, and this is what we have to be looking for. We have to be looking for more greater adoption, ease of adoption, and to build the infrastructure that will enable that to happen. And I think that should be the focus.
All right, I think that's a great note to end the interview. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time out to come speak to us.
No, thanks so much, Trisha. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you on. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram, and subscribe to our newsletter on decrypt.asia. This is your host, Tushar. Thank you for listening.